subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Let's move toward wonderful story. Chamber felt alive, though no one spoke. It breathed in silence and exhaled tension. The throne room of the Zareth Dominion was carved from crystal and dark alloy, and every surface glowed faintly with cold light. The ceiling stretched high, above like the inside of a frozen mountain, and tall glass pillars lined the walls, pulsing with energy from the deep core of the planet. 100 eyes watched, but not a single voice dared to interrupt the silence. Soldiers stood stiff, nobles remained frozen, and beastmasters kept their heads low, their faces pale with caution. No one wanted to draw attention. Not today. Queen Midris stood at the top of the long steps leading to her throne. Her armor was layered blackstone and light metal, woven with glowing rootstone veins. Her face, calm but unreadable, gave nothing away. A crown of silverthorn rested on her brow, and behind her trailed a long cape made of battle silk from the storm beasts of the north. She was fear, she was law, and she was legend. But what held everyone's gaze wasn't her. It was the creature beside her. Balgor walked in silence, each step as careful as a falling star. His body was thick with muscle, wrapped in a coat of dark silver fur that shimmered with threads of titanium. His eyes glowed like molten light, always moving, always watching. He was the last of the soul-born Talons, a secret project once erased from records after too many deaths and too many failures. A monster made by minds who believed loyalty could be engineered into flesh and bone. Balgor had been the only success, and that was a dangerous word. The beast was bound not with chains, but with something far worse. Thought command, a system so complex it could only be used by high-level sovereigns. Midris didn't need to speak to control him. A thought was enough. And if the beast disobeyed, the collar wrapped around his neck would burn into his spine, a slow, sharp reminder of who owned him. At least, that's what everyone believed. The silence was broken not by a scream or a horn, but by a quiet announcement from a court aide. A ship had crash-landed near the edge of the Dominion's protected space. 2 survivors had been pulled from the wreckage, a scout from the rebel fringe, and a mechanic from Earth's outer colonies. The Queen wasn't interested in the scout. Rebels were common. But the mechanic? That was curious. He had claimed he could repair the core systems of the crash shuttle. Those systems were based on the same tech used in Balgor's collar. That made things interesting. "Bring him," Midris said, and her voice cut through the chamber like a blade through silk. The doors opened and Dainro was pushed into the hall, held by 2 armored guards. He looked nothing like anyone expected. He was small compared to the soldiers, wore plain brown clothes stained with oil and engine grease. His face was tired, lined by travel, and one eye was covered with an old patch. He looked like a man who had seen more wires than war. But he didn't shake, he didn't cower. He just kept his eyes on the panel in the room's center, where the collar schematics flickered in holographic light. As he was dragged forward, Balgor lifted his head. His ears twitched. His eyes narrowed. A low, deep growl began to rise from his chest. Everyone held their breath. But Dane didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the beast. He stepped forward on his own and stared at the collar's data display. Then, without asking permission, he muttered, "Whoever wired this into a neural loop didn't understand what they were doing. This isn't control. This is torture." Gasps rolled through the room like thunder. No one ever spoke like that, in front of the Queen. Ever. Midris narrowed her eyes and took a step forward. "You stand in the heart of the Zareth Dominion under my rule, mechanic. Do you beg for your life or simply offer it with insults?" Dane finally looked up. His one visible eye glinted in the pale light. "Neither. But if you want your creature alive by the next lunar cycle, you'll let me rewire the collar. Not to command him, just to stop it from cooking his brain every time he breathes wrong." The Queen stared at him for a long moment. Her silence felt heavier than any weapon. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "Do it, or die beside him." The guards pulled him forward, pushing him toward the dais where Balgor waited. The beast towered over him, unmoving. His breath was slow but heavy, fogging the air around him. Dane stepped closer. A single guard raised his weapon. The Queen made no sign to stop him. Then Dane lifted his hand not to control but to offer. "Hey," he said gently. "You've been in pain a long time, haven't you?" Balgor's growl died in his throat. His body shifted. The energy in the room flipped like a wave crashing against a wall. No roar came. No attack followed. The creature lowered his massive head and leaned into Dane's touch. Gasps turned to silence. And then, awe. Queen Mydris didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared, watching everything she thought she understood fall apart in a single moment. The mechanic had done the impossible. Not with force, not with power, but with kindness. And though no one knew it yet, the Empire had just begun to change. Dane Rowe was not supposed to live past that day. Most in the court had assumed he'd be executed the moment he touched Balgor. But the beast's calm response had left the entire hall stunned, and Queen Mydris, though silent, had chosen to keep him alive. For now. He was placed in the palaces. Lower levels under strict watch. 2 guards followed him everywhere. Hidden cameras tracked his every movement. Every word he spoke was recorded, every breath analyzed. Yet nothing suspicious ever turned up. He spent most of his time in the engineering wing, a place usually reserved for the Queen's most trusted technicians. The walls were lined with ancient consoles and flickering panels, and the air always smelled of burning wires. Dane worked quietly, hands steady, eyes sharp. He didn't act like a spy or someone with a secret plan. He acted like a man who simply wanted to fix what was broken. Balgor started showing up without being called. At first, he would appear at the edge of the room and sit, watching Dane with unblinking eyes. The guards would stiffen, unsure if this was safe. But when the beast made no move to attack, they began to let him stay. After a few days, Balgor would walk directly up to Dane and lie down beside him, resting his head near the man's feet as he worked. No one could explain it. No one had ever seen the creature so calm, so at peace. Dane never gave commands. He never used the collar. He simply talked to Balgor like he was a person. Queen Mydris watched everything from her private chamber. She replayed the recordings over and over. Her fingers dug into the arms of her throne as she tried to understand what had happened. Balgor was her creation, her weapon. She had raised him on pain and silence. He had been loyal to her will, never once showing defiance. But now he followed a man who came from a forgotten part of the galaxy, someone with no rank, no training, no power. She ordered deep scans. Dane was tested for hidden abilities, psychic control, illegal implants. Nothing. He was completely ordinary. His history was clear. He had grown up on a mining station, repaired scrap ships, and had never been involved in anything bigger than local trade disputes. But somehow he had done something she couldn't. He had earned Balgor's trust. That trust spread like a quiet fire. In the court, whispers began to circulate. Guards who had once spoken with pride about Balgor's kills now lowered their voices when they mentioned his name. Nobles grew nervous. Beastmasters whispered that something was wrong with the program, that maybe, just maybe, Balgor had learned something no one planned for. Mydris called her oldest advisor, a grim man named Arvin, known for his ruthless control over Dominion security. She showed him the recordings and demanded answers. Arvin watched the video of Dane sitting on the ground, tired and covered in grease, while Balgor rested beside him. The beast's eyes were closed. His breath was steady. Arvin leaned back and said quietly, "He doesn't treat the beast like a tool. He speaks to him like a friend." The Queen scoffed, but the words stuck. That night she stayed awake in her observatory, staring at the stars. She remembered a time, long ago, when Balgor was no more than a young creature pulled from the breeding tanks. Back then he had made a sound, a whimper, when her hand reached for him through the bars. She had silenced him with punishment, trained him through fear, and yet now she saw him return to a gentler version of himself. In the lower wing, Dane continued his work. He spoke to Bylgor constantly, sometimes joking, sometimes quiet. He never asked the creature to do anything. He simply included him in everything he did. When Bylgor tilted his head or let out a small sound, Dane would pause and talk to him like he understood. One afternoon, Dane sat back against a crate, wiping sweat from his forehead. Bylgor lay nearby, massive and still. Dane looked at him and whispered, "You know they're watching us. I don't think I'm supposed to be your friend." Bylgor didn't move, but his ears flicked slightly. Dane smiled. "It's okay. I'm not supposed to care, but I do anyway." Outside the chamber, two guards exchanged nervous glances. One of them whispered, "Have you ever seen him like that?" The other shook his head. "No. He's different now. Calmer." Soon, the story spread beyond the palace. Traders, messengers, and visiting diplomats carried bits of the tale with them, about the mechanic who touched the Queen's beast without fear, and the monster who listened. No official report confirmed it, but the whispers were louder than facts. Queen Mydris tried to dismiss it all. She told herself it was a passing oddity, a lucky moment, a mistake. But deep down, she knew. Something had shifted. Something important. Bylgor wasn't just following someone else, he was becoming something else. And the mechanic hadn't broken the beast. He had awakened something buried, something once lost. The Queen stood at her balcony that night, looking down at the city, lights far below. Her hands clenched the railing, and her heart, once cold and still, felt something stir. She hated it. She feared it. But more than anything, she could not ignore it. Her weapon, the symbol of her rule, was changing. And it all began with one man who simply chose to speak softly instead of shouting orders. The sun rose over the towers of the Zareth capital with a sharp golden light, casting long shadows across the sky bridges and domes. Today was the Feast of Chains, the most important ceremony in the Dominion, a day when rulers, warlords, and high-ranked nobles gathered to honor the power of control. The Queen's throne hall had been transformed into a great banquet chamber, filled with carved crystal tables, floating lights, and guards in ceremonial armor. Musicians played slow, haunting notes. Everyone had come to see strength, order, and most of all, fear. At the center of it all, Queen Mydris stood at the edge of her throne platform, still and watchful. The air was tight with expectation. It was tradition that Bylgor, the Queen's war beast, would enter last, dragged in chains, a symbol of dominance and power. Every year, this moment reminded the Dominion's enemies that no creature could resist the crown. But as the hall grew quiet and eyes turned toward the entrance, something no one expected happened. Bylgor entered unchained. He walked calmly through the towering doors, his massive paws silent against the floor. The room seemed to hold its breath. His eyes glowed gently, not with anger, but with a calm fire. There were no handlers beside him, no collar sparking with control. The Queen had given no order to release him, and yet here he was. Just behind him, Dane Rowe stepped into view, wearing the same oil-stained clothes he always wore, with a small toolkit slung over his shoulder. He didn't bow. He didn't look afraid. He simply walked. A stir moved through the guests like a silent wave. Some whispered, some stiffened. One warlord's hand reached for the grip of his sidearm but froze halfway, unsure. Dine and Bylgor walked straight toward the center of the hall. They stopped before the throne platform. Dine looked up at Queen Mydris, who stood motionless, her jaw tight. "You enter my hall without permission," she said coldly. "You bring my beast without command. Explain yourself." "I didn't bring him," Dane replied simply. "He came because he wanted to." Gasps followed his words. A few chuckles from distant tables quickly died when Bylgor growled, low and warning. The beast didn't stand as if ordered. He stood as if guarding. Captain Drevik, the Queen's new beastmaster, stepped forward. He wore polished armor made from the plated hides of thunder serpents and moved like a man used to being obeyed. "That's not how it works, outsider," he said sharply. These creatures don't choose, they respond, they act on command. Then command him, Dine said, meeting his eyes. The room turned silent again. Drevik raised a shock spear, its tip humming with crackling blue light. He pointed it directly at Balgor. You dare, Queen Mydris started, but it was too late. Drevik hurled the spear. It cut through the air with speed and deadly purpose, a weapon designed to drop beasts twice Balgor's size in an instant. But Balgor moved, not away from it, but toward it. With terrifying grace, he leapt into the air, caught the weapon between his jaws, and bit down. The metal cracked like glass. Sparks flew in every direction. What remained of the spear fell to the floor in useless pieces. Balgor turned, walked back to Dine, and sat beside him like a guardian. No one spoke. No one moved. Queen Mydris descended the steps of her throne. Her boots rang out across the stone, each step louder than the last. She stopped a few feet away from Dane, her eyes sharp with rage and something else. Confusion. I gave that beast his name, she said slowly. I raised him with blood and silence. He was built for war, not for affection. You've ruined him. Dane's voice was quiet but steady. No, you never ruined him. You just never gave him a chance to be more than what you wanted. You've made him soft. I've reminded him he's not a thing, Dane replied. Something in his tone, something calm and honest, caused even the warlords to lean forward, listening more closely. Balgor turned his head. His glowing eyes met the Queen's. He didn't growl. He didn't roar. Instead, he bared his teeth, not as a threat, but in open defiance. The kind of look that meant, I see you, I remember. I am no longer yours. The Queen said nothing. She couldn't. Her voice, so often filled with power, felt useless. This wasn't rebellion through violence. It was something worse. Rebellion through choice. The creature she had made feared. The beast she had broken and controlled. He had chosen someone else. Hours later, the throne hall was empty, and Queen Mydris sat alone on the edge of her platform. She didn't touch her goblet. She didn't issue orders. Her mind was lost in a sea of memories, moments when Balgor had flinched under her thoughts, when he had obeyed without question. She had believed that obedience was strength. But now she saw something she had never prepared for. What happens when a creature understands it no longer needs to be owned? Outside the palace walls, stars turned slowly over the capital. Dain and Balgor walked side by side through the lower corridors, saying nothing. There were no chains, no commands, only quiet steps and a silent understanding. The mechanic had not taken power. He had given freedom. And the Empire, though still standing, was no longer the same. Queen Mydris stared at her reflection in the obsidian glass of her private chamber. Her ceremonial armor, polished to a mirror shine, seemed heavier than ever. The room was silent, yet her mind echoed with the whispers that now floated through every corridor of the palace. They were not rumors spread by traitors or rebels. They came from her own people, soldiers, servants, beastmasters. They spoke in hushed tones about the mechanic and the beast, about the bond no one could explain, about the moment Balgor, her feared weapon, had looked at someone else with loyalty in his eyes, and worse, about how he had not needed a command to do it. She had trained that beast from birth, pushed him beyond pain and fear until he knew nothing but her voice. He had obeyed like a machine, never flinching, never hesitating. But now something inside him had changed, and it began the day Dainro touched him without fear. Mydris could still see it, the way Balgor leaned into the man's hand, not because he was ordered, but because he wanted to. That moment had shattered the walls of control she had built around her kingdom. Across the stars, the shift was already spreading. On the frost world of Sendra, a bonded flame cat paused during its combat drill and refused to strike. In a war base on the desert moon of Horan, a thunderhound pulled its paw away when ordered to attack. On a trade ship circling the iron moons of Lareth, a hybrid battle beast stared at its handler and slowly turned its head toward the sky, as if hearing something far away. And in every case, the response was the same: confusion, silence, then fear. Handlers and beastmasters could feel it, a A silence louder than any scream, a signal they couldn't control. The queen had spent her life mastering control, but now the chains that once symbolized her rule were becoming useless. She summoned her last loyal whisper priestess, a woman named Belra, known for manipulating minds without leaving scars. Break. The mechanic, the queen said. Not with force, with memory. I want to tear him apart without touching him. I want him to choose wrong. Belra bowed and left without a word. The next day, Dain was brought before the queen again. He looked the same as always, tired, calm, unshaken. She offered him what she thought would be the perfect trap. Balgor had been fitted with a new collar, one that could only be activated by Dain himself. The queen placed a small device in his hand. Press this, she said, and he returns to you, fully obedient, just like before. Deny it, and the bond you built fades. He will forget you. He will walk away. Dain looked down at the device. His thumb hovered over the button. The entire room was silent. Balgor stood still nearby, watching, waiting. One press and the power would be his. One press and the beast would be his to command. But Dain only smiled, shook his head, and let the device fall to the floor. Then he stepped on it, crushing it under his boot. I don't want control, he said softly. He's not mine. He's free. The sound of the broken device seemed to echo for a long time. Balgor didn't move at first. Then slowly he turned away from both of them and walked to the door. No leash, no voice, no promise. Just choice. In the days that followed, the change deepened. On distant planets and moons, bonded creatures began to resist, not with violence but with silence. Some lay down when ordered to attack. Others simply turned away. A few began to follow engineers, caretakers, or quiet workers who had once shown them kindness. Not out of loyalty, but recognition. Inside the palace, many began to question. Beastmasters resigned quietly. Guards lowered their weapons in the training halls. Young handlers who once feared their creatures began speaking to them instead of shouting. And the queen? She stood in her memory chamber watching old recordings of Balgor's earliest days. In one, he stared at her with soft, curious eyes before the pain began. She had seen hope in him once, and she had crushed it. Now, someone else had returned it to him. The final shift came without sound. One evening, as the stars rose over the Dominion's capital, Balgor walked out of the palace grounds alone. No one stopped him. No one dared. He padded down the great stairways, crossed the glowing bridge, and vanished into the dark forest beyond. Some said he left to find peace. Others said he went to awaken more like him. No one really knew. Dain stayed for a time, repairing old machines in the lower decks, quietly helping where he could. But when asked about the beast, he would only say, he's where he wants to be. Then one night he too left, walking the road Balgor had taken, leaving behind a palace full of questions. The Empire didn't fall that day, but something deeper did. The belief that power came only from control. The myth that chains made you strong. Across the stars, creatures once thought to be weapons were beginning to choose something else. And when they did, it did not sound like rebellion. It sounded like freedom.